Hey there, Jeff Manchester, Manchester Music. Welcome. In this video, I want to talk about how to choose the right EQ for the job. When picking an EQ, I think it's important to ask yourself, what do I plan to do with this? What job do I want it to help me with? What sonic goal am I pursuing? Okay, there's a lot of EQs out there and they all do different things. Some are smarter than others, some are emulated after old gear, but they all kind of help you do something in a mix, in a composition, in a voiceover. I think we need to take a step back though and just talk about what an EQ is in the first place before we dive into all the wonderful ways that one would use an EQ. And here's the best definition that I've found. EQs are typically used to control the tone of a sound by allowing you to boost or attenuate. Attenuate is a fancy way to say make quieter. The amplitude of specified frequencies using filter circuits. So what does this mean for you? If you want to make something sound brighter, then you might boost the high end of the frequency range, say stuff from 6K and higher with a shelf. If you want to make things sound darker, you'd probably do what's called a low pass, which prevents high frequencies from being heard by allowing the lows to pass using typically a special filter that just scoops out all the high end information so that all you have is maybe from 0, hertz all the way up, or 20 hertz realistically, all the way up to 16 or 15 or 14 or maybe even 8K or all the way down to 5K. It starts to get pretty vintagey sounding down there. But if that's what you want, that would be a way to make something sound a bit darker, to cut off the high end from that sound source. There's all kinds of different EQs and they more or less do the same thing. So if they do the same thing, why is it that some people use one EQ over another? Well, I think it's because they have different tasks, different jobs. And the way that I'm going to separate it for this video is that you've got two kind of buckets. You have your housekeeping EQs and your tone accentuating EQs. I want to go over each bucket. I want to give examples of each, the kind of jobs that they perform and the benefits and then the downsides of each, starting first with the housekeeping EQs. When I think about housekeeping EQs, I'm talking about, of course, fab filter, neutron. I'm talking about your stock parametric EQ that is in your digital audio workstation. Another one comes to mind, the Surfer EQ. Nectar is another one that comes to mind. You've got Sculptor. I'm reading a little bit because there's a lot of EQs out there from Isotope as well. You've got Soothe from OX Sound. I think I already called out Neutron. Gullfoss, I put a question mark next to because that thing does a whole bunch of different things. But these I would put under the category of housekeeping. They're designed to allow you to go in and see something and remove it, or hear something and know where to find it and remove it. What are the kinds of jobs that we're talking about here? Well, clearing mud, getting rid of ring or feedback from a live, concert performance or something like that. De-essing, so taming harsh sibilants from strongly stressed consonants, not just in a voice. In that case, it'd be like sh, but also from guitars or cymbals. They can often be very sibilant. Also, unmasking instruments from one another. These are things that I think fall under the kind of housekeeping aspect of an EQ's job. And often you'll see these EQs used before stuff that brings up the amplitude of the sound, like a limiter or something like that, because you want to take care of those strident or muddy frequencies before they get amplified and get even worse. You want to take care of it, then you boost the signal up. So you'll often see those things upstream from other dynamics processing that makes things a lot louder. So what are the benefits to some of these housekeeping kind of plugins? Well, first of all, tons of control. As you'll see in the examples that I'm showing you, you can really go in there and fine tune things. You have a lot of dynamic functionality too. Recently, plugins have gotten very smart. They're able to kind of dip things down dynamically and come back up only when a certain amount of amplitude is present in that specific region. So you'll see a lot of dynamic EQs, Neutron, Fab Filter have this. They're often side chainable as well. You can have them talk to each other and say, hey, when the kick goes down in this region, I want you to, come up or choke off or whatever. I'll show more on that. The benefits of some of the super smart housekeeping plugins. I mentioned a couple of them. Soothe. I've made a video about Soothe. Neutron can kind of talk to other neutrons. Fab Filter has a side chaining, as do a lot of other ones. The benefits there is that there's lots of stuff there to get you over the hump really quickly. So you're not just sitting around, scraping around the frequency spectrum, turning things down, listening for problems. They're great for beginners or people who don't have a lot of time. The downsides, I think, is that they don't really have a sound of their own, and you need to know what you're doing when you're playing with them. They can often be very CPU intensive, and they're not terribly inspiring. They're very kind of clinical, and maybe that's just what you want for housekeeping EQ. So I went over the kinds of EQs, the jobs that they do. Now I want to get into actual examples of how to use these housekeeping EQs in the situation of a real mix or master. So let's jump in. All right, so I am in Pro Tools. Do not turn the video off because you don't have Pro Tools. I'm just using this as a container to house a lot of the audio examples. You can use whatever DAW you want. It just happens to be the one that I like to play around in when I'm mixing and stuff like that. So I want to show you an example first here of a snare hit that I got off of Splice. And if you're an audio engineer, you know exactly what's wrong with this snare. And I'm going to show you how a housekeeping EQ can help you kind of fix it. So first, let's take a listen. Pretty standard snare, right? But if you listen very carefully, you'll hear a kind of like whom, whom. It's a resonance. It is some people might categorize it as a kind of a ring. It's there, and I want to show you how a housekeeping EQ kind of technique can help you alleviate that and really just get the best out of the snare. So this is where housekeeping EQs come in really handy. I have a couple of EQs here on the channel. The first one is your classic Pro Tools one. For folks that are in other DAWs, this would be your stock kind of EQ. This is the one that comes in Pro Tools. And what I've done is I bypassed it, because when I unbypass it, I've set up a very kind of high peaked cued node here. And what I'm going to do is go around the spectrum and listen for where that ring is most pronounced. And this is how a housekeeping EQ can be very flexible. I can grab the node here, listen to it, and then scrub around to find the kind of apex of that ring. And then you'll see what I do. I'm going to duck it out. Getting closer. So I'd say it's here about 150. I'm going to be very specific and go 155. So now I'll just go down. My cue's narrow enough, and I'm going to bring the gain all the way down here. So here's before. And here's after. So noticeably better, right? We're still hearing a little bit of the ring, and I could go in and really add more nodes to kind of really capture it or widen or narrow the cue until I get like absolute rejection of that ring. But really quickly, with a housekeeping EQ that's built into this DAW, I can take care of that problem. Now, there are a couple of super smart housekeeping plugins that can help you achieve this if you don't want to scrub around. I'm going to bypass this and go to a favorite, which is the Pro Q3. So I have it dipped down here. I'm going to undo this. And one of the nice things about the Pro Q is that if I settle my mouse here just over the spectra, it'll freeze for me. And you can see here that what it's doing is it's identifying areas of sonic interest in the spectrum. It's decided 376, 1.8, 3.4 kilohertz. These are all kind of things I should take a look at. But it's also got 140 here, which is, you know, because I used my ears in the first example, I know that that's about, 10 hertz off from where it needs to be. It's more at 150, but it's pretty darn close, right? So now I can just see how this sounds by pulling on this, dragging it down. And again, it's not quite in the right range, but it did a pretty good job. I'm going to use the tools here just to move it a little bit, nudge it to about 150. I could also type it in, but we'll just nudge it. 155, I think, right? Now I can narrow the cue. Or widen it until I'm happy. So let's hear the before and after that. And here's after. That's pretty good. I actually think I like what I achieved more with the stock EQ from Pro Tools, but hey, there's a super smart way of identifying, where some ring might be happening. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the benefits of some of these EQs that you don't have with the tone accentuators, which I'll talk about more in the next segment, is that you can make them dynamic. So anytime that ring just comes up, we can kind of push it back down. I'm still getting used to the dynamic controls here in the Pro Q because this isn't my EQ of choice, but you would go over here and bring this in so that it dips it just when it kind of pops up. It's not really ideal for this situation. I'm not even sure I'm using it properly. Let me bring you to a plugin where I know I'm going to use it properly. Again, still getting my hands dirty with the Pro Q for dynamic stuff. This is Neutron EQ from iZotope. This is the EQ that I'm most familiar with. People who've been on the channel for a while probably know why. Here's an example of their kind of freeze feature where what will happen is it'll look around the spectrum for areas of sonic interest and help you kind of hone in on where you need to duck things out. So it's called EQ Learn. I'll play the track, press Learn, and these nodes are going to dance around until they settle on areas of sonic importance. It's kind of that freeze function by another kind of route. So I'll play the track and press Learn. So once this learn goes back to white, the nodes have finished dancing. I'll go over here. It seems like at number 2, we have 137, which isn't too far off from the one in the fab filter. It thought 140 was the area of sonic interest. So 137, of course, I know where it actually is. It's 155. I'll just move it over. And another tip for people that are using this EQ is if you hit Option, you can scrub around the spectrum a bit like I was doing with the Pro Tools EQ to find where that issue might be. I'm going to do that really quickly right now. So right down here is where the readout is to tell us where we are here with our searching. If I double click, it places the node there. I can hit Shift and bring it down. I can narrow the Q. And there it is. If I want to make this dynamic, which is what I was trying to do in the other EQ, but failing, hit dynamic, and now I can change the threshold here. The dynamic mode isn't really suited for this as much. So I prefer to leave it static. And that's another kind of advantage of the housekeeping EQs is that they're very flexible. They can be static in that they don't move or respond to any energy. You plunk the node there, it stays there, the dip or the boost, whatever. Or you can make them dynamic and have them follow around information in the EQ or react to information and bounce down. So I'm just going to leave things where they are here. That sounds good to me. But another example of how to achieve a little bit of like a hint in a super smart way with this plugin. I'll leave it there. I want to jump over to a very, very smart plugin from OX Sound called Soothe 2, which is another kind of favorite of folks. Hopefully I didn't explode my computer. I will just wait for this beach ball to disappear. Okay, so my computer exploded, but we're back and we're in Soothe and we're still talking about this ringy snare. So let's jump back in here. Now, I was mentioning about Soothe. It can go in and listen to problems and just kind of puts the nodes where you want them or where it thinks they need to be. And you can control how much those areas of sonic importance are suppressed. Let's just get into it in action and you can see what I'm doing here. So we have a flat start. Nothing is on. So already I'm seeing some stuff over here. And the way that Soothe works is if I bring this node up, it's going to really push down whatever it thinks is problematic in this area. And it's already found the issue here, right? So at 147 Hertz, it's saying there's a ring going on here. That's pretty good. I might move it over just a little bit. Actually, I'll just put in 155. And I can bring in the depth to kind of get rid of it. So here's what it's getting rid of. I can go to the delta, right? There's that ring. Here's before. And here's after. Unfortunately, I'm still hearing a little bit of ring around there. And one thing that I've found is if you want Soothe to kind of operate like a static EQ, just increase, well, first of all, narrow this Q a little bit. And increase the release. so that it kind of stays, see how it slows down a bit? And now it's not jumping up as much because we've told it to kind of hang out there for a little bit and not come back up so much. Depending on how much experience you have listening for this kind of stuff, and if you know how to use your EQs, you can go in there, listen, scrub around, take care of it. Some people are good enough that they just know, oh, that's like 150, and they'll go in and dip it down. But other people need a bit of a boost to get over the hump. And with some of these plugins, you can, like ProQ and like Neutron, you can use the tools in there, and certainly like Soothe, almost cheating, to go in there and slam things down. So that's an example of some housekeeping and a few different ways to skin that cat with a few different very popular plugin EQs. So I want to talk about another job for EQs, or housekeeping EQs rather, which is unmasking sources from one another. So this is something that people deal with a lot when they've got a vocalist or a kick and a bass, things competing in a mix for attention. What happens is if they're in the same frequency range, they'll overlap, and one of them is going to go down in perceived loudness. It's going to be a little quieter. So we use things like EQs to go, okay, I think that the kick and the bass are interfering with each other in this range. I'm going to dip the kick and raise the bass or whatever. So I want to show you how to actually do this with a pretty smart workflow from iZotope's Neutron, which is using the thing called the masking meter in their EQs. So the thing is, I can add an EQ here, a Neutron, and it's called drums. So we have that drums EQ here where the pencil is. And I have a bass here, and it's called bass. I've named the track bass. So it copies that information here. And here's where it gets really interesting. So I have a Neutron on the drums and the bass. And what I'm going to do is just go in and solo these so you guys can hear them. There we go. So here's what they sound like. Now listen to the drums here. I solo saved it. Don't want to do that. There we go. I'm not really hearing a kick. It's really quiet here, but especially when I bring the bass in, we really don't hear the kick. And that's because the bass is kind of taking the space where the drum's kick is. So what I can do is go in just on the drums Neutron, and from this Neutron, I can go in and see where masking could be occurring, and I could get the bass out of the way of the kick, all from one plugin. So let me show you how that works. I'm going to go up here to my masking meter, and I'm on the drums EQ, I'm going to go bass. So I want to see what's happening on the bass EQ, and I can do that with these tabs here. So here's the drums EQ, and there's the bass EQ. So I'm looking at the bass from the drums EQ, which is pretty cool. I don't have to go over to the drums or the bass EQ Neutron on the other track. It's all happening from the drums track. So again, our kick isn't really popping out. So what I'm going to do is go over here, and I'm going to boost the drum kick a little bit. I'm going to unsolo the bass. So I'm just soloing the drums. Okay, so I'm using my ears and my eyes a little bit to see where that kick is. Gotta be careful we don't clip or anything here. I'm actually going to make this dynamic, so I'm going to have it go up every time it hears or perceives energy in that region. And now I'm going to go to the bass, and I'm going to make a dip where I made that boost, but I don't have to go to the bass Neutron. I can control it from here. And I'll prove it to you. I can go to my bass Neutron, and there's that cut that I made, but I did it from my drums Neutron. So I can bypass them both. And what I want you to listen for here is how the kick is much more pronounced than it was before, because we boosted it and we got the bass out of the way in the frequency range where things were kind of overlapping. So here's before. here's after. Before. So that is another job for a housekeeping EQ. I'm going to talk about a couple more examples here of housekeeping EQs. Another one that comes up a lot is the dynamic kind of tracing of frequencies that are kind of harsh and problematic. This is another great job for EQs, especially some of the smarter ones out there. And you might have heard of the surfer EQ. What it's really good at is following harshness in a node, in a keyboard, something like that, in a vocal. I don't have that, but I have Nectar, which has a similar feature called EQ Follow. And what I've trained it to do is go and attach itself to these nodes in this vocal that are a little kind of like, they kind of sound like that. They accentuate that a little bit, around 100 and 300 hertz. And I've attached them so that they follow those nodes around dynamically and give the vocal a bit more kind of clarity and brightness. So I'm going to play the section for you, and then I'll show you how I did it. And I'm just going to, so here's Nectar. I'm going to bypass this.
I made a mistake last night. Maybe I can make it right. Slide on closer, baby. We can talk about it.
And here it is after.
I made a mistake last night. Maybe I can make it right. Slide on closer, baby. We can talk about it.
So when I listen for harshness, I don't have to listen too long because my ears, I don't know how else to describe this, they just kind of curl up. I just feel them kind of like closing in and kind of, I don't know, clamping down or something like that. And then I go to listen for what frequencies are causing that. And because we have these great EQs that have a representation of the spectra, we can see right away, oh, maybe this kind of peak is what is causing that kind of harshness. That's kind of how I listen and look and then, go off and take care of harshness. So when I heard this vocal, it was very obvious to me that, there was something about it and a kind of honkiness here in the 300 range. And I'm going to show you how to, use a tool to take care of it, like Nectar rather.
I made a mistake last night. Maybe I can make it right.
So you can see right away that peak right there is a little harsh.
I made a mistake last night.
And that's what is contributing to my ears anyway, to that harshness. So what I'm going to do is I just, clicked, I added a node, go to frequency here.
I made a mistake last night.
And it's following it.
Maybe I can make it right.
And I can widen or narrow the Q.
I made a mistake last night. Maybe I can make it right. Slide on closer, baby. We can talk about it. No need to be mad. I made a mistake last night.
So let's just do a before and after with that dynamic frequency following cut. Here's before.
I made a mistake last night. Maybe I can make it right.
After.
I made a mistake last night. Maybe I can make it right. Slide on closer, baby. We can talk about it.
I'm also getting a little bit of harshness here at a third or second order harmonic at 1K. So I'm going to add a node here.
I made a mistake last night. Maybe I can make it right.
Frequency.
Slide on closer, baby. We can talk about it. No need to be mad. I made a mistake last night.
And I can even get rid of some rumble here with a little high pass.
I made a mistake last night.
Not really rumble, but just like this is a female vocal. There's not much down there. So let's just cut it off so that other low end stuff can kind of, be heard in the mix.
I made a mistake last night.
So that's a really quick and easy way to kind of cut resonance and have it follow things and track things. And the great thing about Nectar is we have this parallel mix thing. So if I want, I can just, ease in or out the amount of that suppression with this mix slider. So here's, no suppression.
I made a mistake last night. Maybe I can make it right. Slide on closer, baby. We can talk about it. No need to be mad.
Let's do a big before and after. Before.
I made a mistake last night. Maybe I can make it right.
After.
I made a mistake last night. Maybe I can make it right. Slide on closer, baby.
So on my ears, it's just a lot less harsh and just, less aggressive. And it's a good thing to wear headphones when you're doing this kind of work. On big, loud kind of speakers, this stuff might not pop out as much, but remember, your listener is listening typically on headphones these days. So they're going to hear that stuff. Now, I want to go to one more example of where a housekeeping EQ can be valuable, and that's with just scooping out low-end information, which we kind of did on that vocal, but it wasn't really necessary. So I have a shaker here, and I think as you can hear, there is a little bit of room noise, which is kind of not great. So it's kind of like a whir of like an air conditioner or something. So in that case, we would pull up just a basic EQ from Pro Tools or whatever the heck you want and just do some high passing. Now, we don't want to go so far as to kind of get rid of some of the physicality of the shaker, but you can hear right away a lot of the room is now rejected because we have this high pass filter. And this is a thing that, these EQs are great for. In Logic, I know for sure you actually have the EQ on the track baked in. So you can just click it, high pass it, and then at a glance, you can see if you have a high pass or not from the track level, which is really helpful. So you don't have to open the EQs. I think Pro Tools can do it as well. I haven't really experimented much with some of the new features in Pro Tools. But again, so just a last kind of thing is that they're really good for clearing out mud and stuff where mud shouldn't be, so that stuff where you have low-end information like a bass synth or a guitar or something like that can kind of shine through and be a little bit more heard. So again, different jobs for these housekeeping EQs. And again, just going over the benefits here, lots of control, as you saw, dynamic functionality. They're often side chainable. We can have them talk to each other. And the super smart ones get you over the hump really, really quickly. They're great for beginners or people who don't want to waste way too much time to, kind of go in and scrub around and stuff like that. But the downside is, they don't really have a sound of their own. You need to know what you're looking for. They can be CPU intensive depending on how smart they are, and they're not terribly inspiring. So let's go to some more kind of inspiring EQs. Which are not meant to cut stuff up so much as boost them, brighten them, bring out the best. And they're what I call the tone accentuating EQs. And there's a lot of them around. But the ones that come to mind for me anyway would be the Pultec MEQ5 and EQP1A, the SSL series, the Neve 1073, which does something just by being turned on, the Moog EQ. And the jobs that these guys have is what they do is they accentuate the amplitude of desirable tones of an instrument while imparting a welcome sonic characteristic. It's true that all of the jobs that I'm going to show you of a tone accentuating EQ can be done with a housekeeping EQ. They can all kind of boost something at 10K or whatever. But the reason people tend to go for the tone accentuating EQ, something modeled after an old piece of gear, is because it just has something musical. You'll hear a lot of people say it adds a je ne sais quoi to the sound. And that je ne sais quoi is usually, it's because it was modeled after a famous piece of gear, and the circuitry and the wiring and the chips and transistors all just imparted something really musical and special when you boost it at 10 or when you cut or when you whatever. There's just something about it. There's also quirkiness, like the MEQ5 and the EQP1A from Pultec. Those guys tend to, boost as they cut. That's a weird thing, but some people really like that, and you don't really get that from your housekeeping EQ. So I would say the benefits, musical. They're really easy to use and always sound great is another benefit if you've done your housekeeping. So if you've controlled for sibilance and ring and all that, when you bring stuff up with a tone accentuating EQ, it just sounds really good. They also have fascinating legacies to them. And I think it's this legacy that keeps companies like Universal Audio and Softtube kind of in business, because they have emulations of your favorite gear that was used on your favorite records. And then you get a piece of that and you can kind of use it and feel like, hey, I'm using the same thing that was used on a Steely Dan or a Michael Jackson record or something like that. And the nice thing about these companies is that they often have new functionality, which kind of, we have our knobs and things like that from the Moog EQ or whatever, which isn't really an old, let's say the 1073, but they've got new features in there that kind of brings them into the 21st century. And also they're, infinitely recallable, right? In the old days, you would have a mix, and you'd mix it, and then you'd print it, and then you'd move on to the next mix. And if someone wanted something changed to the first mix, you'd have to go back and see where the masking tape was and the Sharpie, and go back and recall that mix manually, or take a little photo or a Polaroid or something. So that's the nice thing about having these tone accentuating EQs that are built off of the legacy of some company 60, 70 years ago, is we can bring them into the digital age and recall them and have them up instantly, and also have tons of them, right? We can have a whole bunch. You used to buy like one LA2A. Well, now you can buy one from Universal Audio and print them across your mix as much as your CPU will allow. So what are the downsides? Well, they're not really precise. You don't have a ton of control over them. They're kind of stacked and designed to go up and go down in certain areas. They're not very precise or predictable. As I mentioned earlier, the EQP1A will boost as it cuts. And if you don't know that, you might be going insane trying to get it to sound really good. So with all those things said, I want to give you an example of how you would use one of these tone accentuating EQs in the real world, in this case on a snare. So let's jump over to Pro Tools, and I will show you how this works. So here I have an SSL channel strip. This is the legacy version from Universal Audio, and it's more than just an EQ. There's also some compression, which I'll show you, but it's designed to get you where you need to go really, really quickly. This is a piece of gear that has a sound to it that people love, and here's kind of why. So I'll loop this snare. So there it is. It's pretty boring, isn't it? Not much going on. So let me just start EQing and getting a sound. Again, we don't have the spectrum. We don't have things bopping around. So we kind of have to know what we're doing, but we can get some good results even if we don't. But it helps to kind of know what these things do. So what I'm going to do is hit the EQ in. Okay. And I'll go over here and add a little bit of gain at about 10K. Bring the loudness up here. And I'll go in here and add a little bit of magic over there, widen things up a bit. Now we're getting some tone, right? We're accentuating the tone that's already in there. Let me add a little bit, narrow this. So there's some attack. Just go and then come back and widen this up a bit. There we go. And I'll add a little bit of 300. There's that meat. So let's see how far we've come in just a couple seconds. So before and after. So we've accentuated the tone significantly, I think. And I'm kind of cheating here, but I want to show you some compression. Hit this, and then very simply we go to the dynamic section. Drop my threshold. Bring the output down because we're getting a little bit of red. Before. And after. So this is why people like this kind of gear, is everything's in one place. It reminds you of using classic gear. It sounds really good. It's very easy to use once you know what you're doing. And yeah, you have a little piece of history in your digital audio workstation. How cool is that? Another example here is the EQP1A from Pultec. I called up a preset here. So this isn't going to be as dramatic as the first example because we don't have compression here, but it'll get the point across. So before. After. So the snare is much snappier. It's kind of more in the ballpark now. It's kind of coming to life, and I don't want to go over all the parameters in here, but I just wanted to show you another classic piece of gear that people go to a lot for tone shaping. Now, this wasn't really in the category that I was talking about before, this EQ, but you have a lot of EQs now that use spectral shaping, which is like an army of multiband compressors all along the spectrum. And this is something that Soothe does a little bit, but you can use them to tone shape and accentuate as well. Neutron Sculptor does a pretty darn good job of that. And you'll see here that it's actually like it's pretty cool what it does. You start here by, choosing the kind of instrument that you want it on. And what it's going to do is just kind of push the spectra to kind of conform it to the ideal sound of a snare as determined by the engineers over at iZotope. So bring the tone up or down. Now it's a bit meatier, a bit brighter. I can restrict the kind of action to different parts of the spectrum. Whoops. So in a couple seconds, here's before. And here's after. So it kind of sounds like our EQP1A a little bit, but we're not using old gear. We're accentuating things with some new kind of tech. So here's the EQP1A. Here's before. After. And here's before sculptor. And after. So different ways to skin a cat. I just wanted to show you another kind of application for tone accentuating EQs. Another way that we use tone accentuating EQs would be in a mastering context. So I have here a little orchestral sample, and I'm going to call this up. This is a Manley massive passive EQ. This is used a lot in mastering situations. It looks really complicated. Again, I'm not going to go into all the ways that one would use it, but you can do things like boost 27 kilohertz to add that air and that sheen. It's just, again, it's designed to emulate all the amazing qualities of the original piece of gear and give them to you in the digital world. And also do things like recall, and call up samples or call up presets that were used in other sessions, but also you've got a bunch of really great presets from from other folks here. So here's a track really quickly here. I'm just going to play a before and after. I came up with some settings here. Here's before. Here's after. Keep going. So before, just watch the little bypass button. So that's an example of a tone accentuating EQ in a mastering context. There's one more that I feel I have to mention because these guys come up a lot in some of the questions and stuff, and this is Gullfoss. This is one of the downsides, I think, of tone accentuating or of super smart tone accentuating plugins is that they're kind of a black box. I'm not really sure what Gullfoss is doing. I've reviewed it before. I think that in the right situations, it's awesome. In other situations, it's like, I wish I could change this, but you can't really go in and change it, and you don't really know what it's doing. But let's play around with it a little bit on the same track and see if we get anything we like out of it. Let's bypass that. Don't know what I just did. Okay, that doesn't sound very good, does it? But anyway, I don't use Gullfoss that much, but a lot of people do. And if they do, it's because they love it. So anyway, so hopefully that gives you a lot of insight into why you would use one EQ over another, the different jobs they perform, the good and the bad, And if you have any other EQs that you really like, that you want me to talk about or want me to review, or anything that another job for it or something like that, please let me know in the comments. There are thousands of things EQs can do. They're everywhere. They're in your headphones, they're on your telephone, they're in your microphone. They're all over the place. So get to know them, know what they're used for, and know what you want to do before you call it up, and have some purpose. Be purposeful with your EQing. Don't just call it up to call it up. Anyway, let's leave it there. Thank you so much for watching. As always, Jeff Manchester. Bye.